Hello, seniors. Here I am just hanging out with the boys up there. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosie the Riveter up there. Anyway, I'm in the building, but not in the classroom today. So I want to review just a few notes with you and get you set up uh, for next class. So first of all, thank you for submitting your public policy papers. I will grade those over the next 1 to 2 weeks. I don't think there's any better way to figure out what politics is really like than to see how policy is put together. So give yourself a pat on the back for actually having that done, for submitting those. A nice rest here. Okay, now let's move on with life. Why? Because AP Gov waits for no one. We're going to start our last unit of study today. It's on political participation. You know what politics is all about. In your mind, refresh your memory. What are the two components of politics? That's right. They are winning elections and making policies. So we are going to look at all of that, things like elections and voting. And then we take a look at what we call linkage institutions. What in the world is that? These are groups that link us to politics. Since we're not actively engaged in making laws, etc., how do we get linked up there? Well, political parties do it, interest groups do, and the media does. And that'll be the topic that we're going to focus on for today. One side note, if you are taking the AP exam, make sure you grab a copy of the practice exam for over the weekend along with the answers. It's only multiple choice questions. Again, when you have time, sit down and take 80 minutes, which is the time you get for the test, and make sure you do those. The more reps you get, the better you are. Okay, so go to Canvas and open up Unit 5 on political participation, please. And you're going to throw that in Notability. Now, the first thing you might say is that's a lot of pages there, Mr. Goldsmith. It's the last unit of study. It is a pretty significant unit full of content. It's the last unit exam you're going to have. You can do it. You're fine. And normally we would go through and look at all the vocab, the objectives, the daily schedule, etc. Today we're going to get straight to it. I'm going to start at the end today. We're going to talk about the media. I'm going to go over just a few notes. I'm going to have you work on an assignment in class. I don't want you to have any homework. You just spend a lot of time writing a test for me. And so I want you to be able to knock this out in class, which you will do with a focused effort. So let's go way, way back to page 26 out of 29 till you find the heading, The Media and American Politics. So let me go through just a few of the notes here on the media. What is the media? The media is basically how we get information, and news media is how we get news information. So if we put those together, we know that they have a big impact on politics. And one of the big takeaways, the one you should highlight there on the fourth bulleted point, is that the more sources of information you have, the less impact any one source of information has. For example, when I was your age, back in time ago, there were only 3 channels on television. Nobody ever heard of a podcast. You got maybe 5 scratchy AM radio stations and 1 local newspaper. That was all the news you got. So every one of those is pretty important. It could have an impact politically. Now we know there are thousands of sources of media, so the impact of any one source has gone down tremendously. Okay. Most of you say that you get your news from social media. Okay, that's fine. Take a look at the chart there. And this is where, as of 2022, America is getting their news from on social platforms. Yes, number 1's Facebook. Ask your parents about it. Okay, so as far as social media goes, that's where America's getting their news. I don't typically see this as good an option as getting your news from, I don't know, other legitimate news sources that don't spend time with stories and tweets and things. But again, it's not a bad place to start. I always think social media is a place to start to get to other sources of information. If you want to get your information where Mr. Goldsmith gets his political news from, I always go to daily, a website called realclearpolitics.com. I do it because it's got both sides of the story for almost every single topic of the day, written by pretty solid authors typically, and always a rundown of the latest political news along with polling information. It's good stuff. Okay, just a little bit of history, not too much, but a little bit. If we combine media and politics, we're going to go back to Hamilton and Jefferson again, the arch enemies of Washington's first cabinet, and they each organized rival newspapers to compete with one another. Now, those newspapers are 100% political. All they do is they spit out Federalist or anti-Federalist viewpoints. All right, so we move forward, and then we have basically an increase in literacy in the early 1800s. We start to get more newspapers because more people can read. They start to sell advertising. The first newspapers sold for 1 penny in America. They called them the penny press. Catchy little name there. Now we're going to keep moving forward even more. Eventually we get to the point where the media kind of checks itself. It does not keep spitting out totally partisan news. In fact, it prides itself on becoming independent of politics, independent of the political news. All right. And so they entered a phase where not only were they independent, but then they started doing investigative reporting. In your history class, we might have called it muckraking journalism, like, when you're reading The Jungle and you get grossed out, and then Teddy Roosevelt tries to get a bunch of laws passed because it's kind of gross out there. So you get the idea. Now the news is there to actually investigate and to help to make life better. That moves forward to the early 1970s, and we have a breakthrough moment where the Washington Post literally takes down a presidency because they uncover the Watergate scandal, the Watergate cover-up, and President Nixon is forced to resign. Then we go ahead to the 80s and 90s, and literally what happens is an explosion of news options. There are so many out there you can't even keep track of them. So again, the more we move forward in time, the less impact any one source of news has. So with all this splintering of news and media sources, you might think, okay, well, who actually controls things today? Even though there's 1,000 options, I want to introduce a term to you called a conglomerate, a media conglomerate. There are 6 media conglomerates in America, and they control over 90% of all the media. Now, I didn't say news media. I said media. So basically everything that you're watching on TV, everything that you're downloading, it probably has its origins in one of these 6 media conglomerates. You can take a look at them there. Now, why do we care about media conglomerates? Well, it's always dangerous to have so much power in so few hands. Any business major will tell you that. Also, if you get one conglomerate that controls multiple sources of media, especially news media, they tend to have a similar political outlook. For example, your first option there is Comcast. Comcast owns everything that has the initials NBC in it. That's always going to be left-leaning. Then you go to 21st Century Fox. Well, of course, any Fox network is going to be there. Yep, we're just a little bit off to the right now. Disney is the owner of ABC. Now, I can tell you from watching this for a long time and reading various news sources, ABC morphed into not really a news channel, but a news/entertainment channel once Disney bought it. Disney also bought ESPN. Ever since that happened, ESPN's become more political. It's become more left-leaning to kind of match Disney's perspective. All right. So again, those are some of the potential things to look out for with the media conglomerates. Now, how about the media when it comes to public opinion polling? We went over polling a couple weeks ago. Two phrases I want you to know, and they're going to be in your homework that you're going to do in just about 5 minutes. One is called agenda setting. One is called issue framing. So this is the media telling you what's important in the news and framing the issue for you. For example, if I have an article, a news article, and it's the first thing on the first page, the media is telling you that's the most important news item of that day. It's not the second page, it's the first. And maybe the type is 200 font instead of 24 font. That's telling you something as well. Maybe the article has 800 words instead of 200 words. That's telling you something. Maybe the podcast is 20 minutes long instead of 2 minutes long. You get the idea. The more emphasis they put on it, the more they're setting the agenda. The other one, which people really need to look out for, is issue framing. In other words, they're telling you what aspect of the story is important. For example, if I'm talking about American intervention in Afghanistan over the past several years, and I focus on the number of American troops that died in Afghanistan, that's framing the issue in one way. I can write the same story, but now my focus is on the number of women who have voted since American troops were in Afghanistan. Still a story about Afghanistan, totally different. Now I update the story and now I talk about the Taliban taking away those rights. Again, I'm framing the issue for you. Sometimes it makes it very challenging to do your own thinking when they're framing the issue for you. You should always look for a balance for both perspectives in every news story because sometimes you just don't get that. The ultimate story of the media butchering not just politics, but an election is the 2000 presidential election. Now, the media always wants a close election. Why? Because then people tune in. They call it a horse race, all right? And so you want to go ahead and have a great competitive election. The media is drooling over the possibility of Trump and Biden again, not just for people who love them, but for people who aren't fans of them, because that means viewership, that means clicks, etc. Well, in 2000, they predicted the winner of the presidential race on that night twice, and they got it wrong both times. It's a long, sordid story, but basically they were in a big rush to be the first ones to report the winner, and they ended up getting it wrong. Okay, so if you want to click on that, watch it in your own time. I've left the link right there for you. One last term I want to throw at you is something called the bully pulpit. This is a famous phrase of Teddy Roosevelt's, and it basically means that the president has the power to command the media. Whatever he wants to talk about, that's what the media talks about. Whatever he wants to emphasize, the media's all over it. So he's got this pulpit, kind of like a priest in mass, and Teddy Roosevelt used to say bully when he was really happy, hence bully pulpit, the president controlling the media. Now about that media, is it biased? Let me think about that. Thomas Jefferson, is the media biased? As you see, yes, that's one of those is the Pope Catholic types of questions. The media can be amazingly biased. So I put a handy chart for you called the media bias chart, and you can see left, right, left. The farther left we go, we get liberal. The farther right we go, we get conservative. The farther up we go, we get factual reporting. The farther down we go, we're kind of making stuff up. Okay, so if you go off to the left, of course, you'll find the New York Times hidden in there. You'll find MSNBC. There's Rachel Maddow, smiling face. You can see The Guardian, the Daily Beast. These are all famous liberal outlets. To the right, we have the Wall Street Journal hiding in there. Of course, Fox News is going to be living over there, the National Review, etc. Ben Shapiro's smiling face. Almost looks like Will Kleesner's smiling face. But I digress. Okay, just a little help for you. Now, those are the notes. That's it. Go ahead and open up a file called Media Analysis. Open up Media Analysis, please. All right, while you're getting this open, this is what I want you to work on the rest of class. Basically, you're going to look at President Biden because the president always commands the news. You are going to find something he did on the exact same day, probably in the last week. So maybe today or yesterday. Last I heard he was visiting Ireland, etc. Or maybe he's talking about a bill or a certain law or talking about a social issue, etc. I need you to find 3 different sources of media, all reporting the same thing. Okay, all reporting the same thing. And then you're just going to break down how they report it. You're going to tell me about the agenda setting and issue framing of each of those with examples. Read the directions, it's in there. And then I also want you to take that source of information and run it through something called the media bias fact check. And that will tell you which way your source of information leans politically, left, right, etc. I think it would be great fun if you would find 2 sources of media that you know are on opposing political spectrums, just to take a look at how they are reporting the same information, how they are issue framing and agenda setting. Okay, that is it. You have the rest of class to work on that. Again, thank you for writing your papers. If you're taking the AP Gov exam, grab that sample test and have yourself a big day. Go Saints.